Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Interesting development in the Middle East. A lot of stuff is happening where we need to understand what is the future ramifications of the Iran Saudi Arabia deal. One of the biggest things that is actually taken place is that the Chinese actually were successful in brokering this deal. And that's something that we need to again consider with regards to regional geopolitics. Now, this is the second show for the day, guys. Thank you so much for joining in. I hope you enjoyed the first show with General Rajiv Narayan. That was an eye opener on China and what scares Xi Jinping. As a matter of fact, talking about Xi Jinping, he's just been re elected of sorts in the two sessions. And a day after that, this rabbit out of his hat was pulled out. We need to understand what is exactly happening. Now, of course, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into this today, a little bit. And of course, I've got somebody else, if I may, Mr. Ravi Joshi, who's going to join us probably Wednesday or Thursday and give us an insight as to the deeper reactions. Today is the first one. Lot many reactions have come, some are on the way, and probably a lot many people in the West are still digesting what exactly has happened. India's at the moment not said anything. But with regional geopolitics, we should be able to figure out what's the game that is happening behind, and if there is any certain significance with regards to Chinese being a part of this deal. Before I begin and give you guys the slides that I've prepared for you, I wanted to actually just say one little thing. Uh, all these tensions within the Middle East are basically divided uh, because of divided cultures, divided ethnicities, divided, you know, uh, religion, and whole lot of things like that. The story, if I may, would start around. I mean, the story starts long back, but the story, if I may, would start around the First World War when the Ottoman Empire got crushed. Things were a little bit and in a sort of a chaos. And then, because of unfair treaties, again, I'm mentioning this word unfair treaties because a lot of things that have actually happened in the Middle East are also sort of unfair if you look at it from the people in the Middle East, their perspective. So, the Second World War happened, and then the areas in the Middle East were divided. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia came in, nation states basically got born in this particular region. Now, these nation states were drawn as per strategic interests of Western powers, also considering certain religio ethnic boundaries. But a lot of them have these tensions which were innately brewing within themselves. Look at Iraq for that matter. There are, three different regions within Iraq where three different people, and we all know the tumultuous history of Iraq till the times of Saddam Hussein was there, and then after that, what happened, and this and that. You know the issues in Syria, which are currently actually ongoing. You've got Iran, which is on the fritz since 1979, and of course there is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that has been able to prosper, that has been able to set up, and then you've got the small Emirati kingdoms and all that stuff. What happened post the Second World War in Europe and in the Middle East in terms of the boundary drawing has been similar. We could also look at the same sort of a scenario within India. A lot of the boundaries were drawn without considering a lot of ground realities. So these are festering battles, festering wars, festering problems that are going to continue because of miscited adventures, if I may, of the Western powers. With that as a background, we have to look at Saudi Arabia, which has been more or less a stable country, and Iran, that was a stable country till 1979, and then the revolution happened. Uh, if you look at it from the Western perspective, they got destabilized and a whole lot of things happened. But if you look at it from the Iranian perspective, they followed the path that they wanted to. Of course, the Iran-Iraq war, which happened, long war, which created a lot of turmoil within the region. But things did calm down after that. What started up this whole tension once again is the Arab Spring. Now, when the Arab Spring happened, a lot of tensions, a lot of resistance came within the public, and this is the aftermath of the Iraq War. I won't say aftermath. This is after the Iraq War. A lot of festering tensions kind of took place within the region, and it came out to be a very interesting development because people got divided. Minor wars took place, minor fights took place, and of course, the biggest powers in the region who wanted to dominate the region tried to divide the region amongst themselves and these little ethnic populations and stuff like that. Now, me and General Narayan have actually discussed what is the US plan for the region. How will the area look like with the redrawing of the boundaries of in the Middle East? So now you understand the session that we had done a couple of days ago, about a week or two ago with General Narayan, that redrawing of the boundaries in the Middle East has actually, it's not a dream. It is actually a serious project that has been taking place that has resulted in all these tensions around the region. Now let's dig into the presentation with this whole little background that there are certain innate brewing tensions within the region, apart from the two big major powers, which are Saudi and Iran, and of course you've got Israel on the far end, on the you know the other side. How does this whole thing play out, right? Let's look at this. And before I do, guys, please like this video, subscribe, and it's nice to see some new faces coming in, and I hope to grow this community even further. We are at about 15,350 odd followers. We just did 15,000 a couple of days ago. It's nice to see that the count is growing up, and let's hope for the fastest reach to 20,000, and that's the next target for the Dev Talks family, right? I'm gonna call it the family. Right, let's look at this. Iran and Saudi Arabia mend ties. What is the impact on geopolitics? Of course, this is too small to read, but I just wanted to show this. This was the statement that I read at 5 o'clock in the morning when I woke up today. It was quite a shocker to me as well, but I was actually following this region. This region has interested me a little bit, so I've been following this region to see what has been taking place. Now let's dig into these entire things to realize, is this a new development or has this been happening for a little bit? Snippets. Uh, the ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran broke off in 2016 after protesters invaded the Saudi diplomatic post in Iran. Right, Saudi Arabia had executed a prominent Shiite cleric, Nimr al Nimr, days earlier, and there were a lot of demonstrations within Iran. So diplomatic ties were cut and the embassies were closed. So it's not a new thing that these both countries have actually patched up, right? So that's something which is a baseline we must understand. Now, the biggest thing that I would look at is the negotiations that have taken place do have the potential of limiting or lowering the chances of armed conflict within the region. Directly, indirectly, proxies. We all know the kind of proxies that are taking place within Yemen, within Iraq, within uh, Syria, and a whole lot of things. Now, when we go down into the game, right? Iraq, which has been a neighbor to both the countries, which is, I would not call it a complete vassal, but a pro-US state, has hosted a lot of rounds of these negotiations since April 2021. And before that, I believe Qatar was also, you know, doing the same. So the question I ask is that, is this a big, huge message for a small show just because the Chinese were involved? Let's dig into it and see what we find. Now, the first question a lot of people will ask is that, have the Saudi Arabian and the Iranians have they been cold all the time? No, that's not the case. They've had decent, I mean, not, I won't call it decent, but they've had diplomatic relations where head of states actually visited each other. This is a photograph in 1997 when Crown Prince Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud is greeted in the airport in Tehran by the Iranian President Mohammad Khatami, December 8, 1997. Now, as I said, the Arab Spring created a lot of fragmentation within the societies, and it created these issues which basically was requiring in both of these powers point of view. We need to understand that they both tried to figure out how to exert influence on these little splinter groups so that they could, you know, become a little more dominant in the region. So that's something which started up quite a lot of tensions within the Middle East as well. Now, Saudi Arabia, I want to give a little background because Saudi is also doing a lot of stuff with the US, a lot of stuff with Russia, a lot of stuff with the background with regards to the Abraham Accords and stuff like that. Saudi Arabia has been asking the US to provide a lot of security guarantees and help to develop its civilian nuclear program. Now, one would wonder why Saudi Arabia needs a nuclear program when they're literally floating on oil. It was basically a dangle that the Saudi Arabia asked for if they needed to mend their ties with Israel. So the Saudis told the US is that listen, if you want us to mend our ties with Israel, you got to help us out with give us security guarantees and ensure you give us help on civilian nuclear program. The plan 2030 as per MBS is very futuristic, and he wants to move his country away from the predominance of oil sales and stuff like that. Now there is a caution, right? The minute the Saudis actually get down into this particular deal, it may, you know, it may come under fire from a lot of the pro-Sunni hardline Western Middle Eastern states, right? So that's something I don't know. Why am I asking? Is this part of the plan? Is this part of the larger game plan within the region to reshape it? Right? When you have tensions, there's also outcomes out of it. So that's something that we need to consider going forward. So firm guarantees is what Saudi Arabia is asking for with regards to its existence and defense. Very, very clearly, the emphasis on Saudi defense from the United States. Now, these assurances, whenever they've been Republicans in power in the US, they've been given and they've been adhered to. Whenever they've been Democrats, they get back to their whole Rona about, human rights, yeah, wo, this, that, and everything, and the slide deals keep going on. The entire thing that we know about right now is that when Joe Biden came into power, he tried to muff the Saudis and put them away, and he actually called them a pariah state, right? This was because of the alleged involvement of MBS within the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a prominent critic of the Saudi government and the Saudi establishment. Now, is Saudi Arabia finding in its own ways, showcasing its independence of thought a little away from the US? Some examples were given some time ago where the Saudi kind of pushed back on the US. And is this another way of the Saudis kind of trying to exert their presence and their uh, strength within the region that they can and will take decisions on their own without the blessings of the US? That's a big question that we need to ask and we need to look at going forward. uh, the options when the Republicans were in power, the Saudis wanted this defense deals and stuff like that. They wanted to name the Saudi Arabia as a major non-Atlantic treaty organization ally, which was Pakistan at one time, if you remember. The status was given to Israel, Qatar, Jordan, and other countries friendly to US interests. They would formally make Saudi and US ally, give it easier access to American weaponry. And this is after the Saudis still hold US troops on its land, right? Is this a negotiation ploy to get that particular assurance and that particular tag of a non-NATO ally from the US? Because the US would, want to balance this situation out, something that we'll have to see. If there are developments in this particular region, it will be a bang on target, because there's always going to be a give and take in terms of international relations. Saudi sources say that it was China's plan, right? And at least in principle, it will be able to hold Iran to account. And that's what the Saudis, some officials in the foreign service of the Saudi Arabia have said. How far that thing is going to turn out, because the Chinese also will not stand if the things go south, they will back off, is something that we'll have to actually see. Of course, MBS, who's a new ruler in Saudi Arabia, has changed the country quite a bit. Women are driving, the religious, and I'm sure you know the whole list of things not to do during the holidays, which have been released recently. He's trying to bring about a certain change, get foreign investment, make it a little more open place, just like the Emirates in the UAE and stuff like that, so that there's a lot more people that come in, tourism and a whole lot of other things. He also wants to prove himself that he's a strong leader of his country, and he can actually stand and protect his nation's interests. And of course, the OPEC stand that he took, the tough stand that he took against Biden, because Joe Biden had called him a pariah and this and that, and then he had to go on his knees and meet MBS and try and ask him that, yeah, thode se petrol ka wo बढ़ा दो. The Saudi said, we'll check back and come back to you with OPEC plus and this and that. One of the biggest things we must understand: OPEC plus, Saudi controls OPEC. The plus is Russia. So the Saudis literally told the Americans, listen, we'll check with Russia and come back to you in a certain way if you look at it. So that was a tough stand. And on top of that, they reduced the production. The oil prices went up, and a lot of backlash came on towards the Americans for that. The Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud said it would be better to change the format of the JCPOA so that other countries excluded regional powers most affected by Iran's nuclear program were included. JCPOA has been on and on again, off again, on again, off again, Iranian nuclear deal. Uh, the interesting thing about this JCPOA is that Trump pulled out of it. Joe Biden wanted to get in the middle of it, and things have not been working out. And a lot of the European powers are actually involved in this entire game. So that's something that we need to understand. Saudis, let me say this very clearly, and I have a friend who I spoke to, not a friend, I mean, he's also in geopolitics and stuff like that from Saudi. So I messaged him, and the only thing that he said is that we are not very certain if the Houthis and the other proxies of Iranians would be getting into any sort of talks with the Saudis to kind of end the conflict, and that's something that we'll have to look at going forward. Uh, Tensions have been there. Houthis keep firing these rockets into Saudi Arabia, blowing up their oil tankers, and this and that and the other, and it's quite a quite a thing that they've had to actually get into this entire thing very very at the back end. Now, the problem with Saudi Arabia and Iranian proxies is in basically in Yemen. We all know the war which is actually happening there, and these proxies have been supplied by very very effective drones and stuff like that by the Iranians, and they've been attacks. There is just no question about it. They've been attacks in Iraq where the US bases are there on US troops. So the Iranians have been playing games all around the place, and that's something which is very interesting, and it's a very important point when we talk about Iran. We'll get into it. Saudi Arabia has also encouraged a very harsh response from the West towards Iran's nuclear program. It's always been a drum beater saying, "Nahin, nahin, nahin, this is not acceptable, this, that, and the other." So they've been doing diplomatic back channels with Israel against and creating an anti Iran force in the Middle East. They've been doing all that. And they've also coordinated a lot with the Western world with regards to the threat from Iran. The question is, what will happen to all this? And that's something that we need to understand. They've just asked, this is exactly what we need to understand. Why is it that everybody is talking about a complete change in the factor in Middle East by just these two guys getting back diplomatic relations? Will the Saudi Arabia and the Iranians move away from their very very harsh anti each other stand? If that much of an infrastructure has been created, will the Saudis just let the Israeli deal go? Right? Saudi and Israel and UAE and Israel, as a matter of fact, coordinate very deeply on security matters. Would the Saudis leave away all their back channel conversations with Israel just because they've gotten friends with Iran? I don't think so. Economically, of course, Saudi Arabia wants to pitch away from oil. It needs, and any peace with Iran, no rockets firing around the place and stuff like that, would bring in stability. That's something you can understand, right? They would say, yaar, ye Houthi Shootis ko band karo yaar. At least we'll be able to get some stability in terms of investment within our country. And Saudi is fast becoming one of the fastest growing G20 economies, uh, and it's doing well. There's no question about it. Economically, that is. Beijing now, uh, it's very interesting that the Chinese, the Saudis, UAE, or any of the Middle Eastern powers are not going to be relying on the Chinese for their security. So the security and defense would straight again go back to the US. So if anybody says that the US is completely lost in this particular game, I won't think so, because security interests of this region still lie a lot in US hands. Let's talk about China. The Chinese talk about the factor that by we are only interested in trade. We don't want any political influence. We don't want anything. Uh, you know, uh, it's we don't want any sort of a game here and there and stuff like that. But their influence politically has been now seen very openly, right? This is a political move. If the Chinese were not interested in getting into political confrontations or political relations with any country, why are they doing this? The timing of this is very, very interesting, because at the end of it, we have Xi Jinping's re-anointment. He's just given the crown the third time, and the next day this happens. Now, one thing, as I said, the US provides a lot of the defense and security for the region. And the Chinese have been basically a freeloader, right? They've been using the entire game, the security umbrella provided by the West, and being a freeloader. By my, I'll do deal with this, that, and the other. At the end of it, remember, the Persian Gulf is still patrolled by the US. And all the oil that goes to China from the Persian Gulf is under the security umbrella of the US. So it's a very interesting thing that you must understand. The Chinese would want to sell it hard, but the reality is this: that none of the Middle Eastern states would actually go back to China with regards their defense, with regards their security. They might buy weapons like the Saudis have done, but beyond that, there's a big doubt. China, which recently hosted Iran's President Raisi, is also a top purchaser of Saudi oil. A lot of people said that at the time when Xi Jinping went into Saudi Arabia, the Iranians were not very happy. Now, I refuse to agree to that, and I refuse to believe that. It is very, very interesting that the- because these talks between the Chinese and all these three of them have been happening. And I'd said this on the show as well, and we had Raisi visiting Beijing, and we also know that I think Xi Jinping is also planning to go to Iran as well. The Chinese, had, you know, okay, the US, if I may, you look at the stand with regards to Ukraine. It's my way or the highway. It's hawkish. It's hard, right? Now, the Chinese have actually squeezed into this hawkish sort of a design and played a very mellow role in this region, sending a signal that, yeah, listen, I am not the hawkish hardline stick holder, which the Chinese are actually, but they tried to send a message to the world that, listen, I can also do good things. Okay, so that's something that again we need to look at. Now, if uh, for decades, the Beijing always worked on Russia's influence within the Middle East and worked through them. Is this now the Chinese trying to leave behind Russia and get their own game within the Middle East? Contrarily, is Russia, given a certain amount of blessing for the Chinese to go ahead and do something like this? Because the Russians do have a large influence within the Middle East, and that's something that we need to understand with regards to OPEC. It's a relatively low risk, high reward activity for China, right? They, even if the things go bad, they didn't lose anything. Yeah, okay. I mean, we tried it, it didn't work. So what? So they have showcased a very positive side of themselves. And that's something that we need to understand. Of course, nobody is going to get fooled by China, but they're trying to do this. They are not committed to anything, and that's what they are trying to say. Okay, but for them, why is it important? But before that, I want to ask a question. What if Iran still gets the bomb? How does China react to that? How does Saudi react to that? Right? We'll ask these questions as we go forward during the show. Now, why did the Chinese do something like this? The US have been talking about a pivot to Asia and this, I mean, a decade old thing. They're now stuck in Ukraine, of course, but they've been talking about a pivot to Asia. Now, the Chinese create a little bit of a tamasha within the Middle East and show that they've got influence in the Middle East. The US withdrawal from the Middle East would be a little difficult. So keep the US involved there so that it doesn't meddle around with the South China Sea and so on and so forth. Oil, you know, keep oil flowing via Iran, Afghanistan, China, something that we need to consider. Pipelines, there's that, I don't know, because the Chinese are also trying to make their footprint into Afghanistan. So is this offsetting Pakistan? We'll have to see. These are all very, very, I don't think this will happen, but these are all possibilities that could actually take place. 40% of Chinese energy comes across from the Middle East. So protect its energy flows. If there are tensions between uh, US and there are tensions between Saudi and Iran, you will not be able to do a lot with regards to you know uh, oil purchases because there have been tensions. So what do you do? The biggest thing that I want to mention and that we talked about with General Ryan today also in the afternoon is this global security initiative, right? They're trying to get a certain name in terms of global security, that we will be the peace brokers for the world. They've given a plan for Ukraine and now they're doing this. So is this a series of activities that we going to see the Chinese trying to resolve disputes and position themselves as a counter to the US, saying that US starts war, we try and finish it? We need to understand this because this is a narrative warfare between both the countries again. Now, the US has been taking sides in regional conflicts, and that's something we know. One thing that's very sad about the US, and I'd like to say this, is that as the largest power in the world, the strongest military power and stuff like that, the US must play a little more balanced role, right? They have to be, yeah, guys, okay, listen, relax, calm down. Let's figure this out. That would give them a lot more respect than what they literally try and do, sending people like Victoria Nuland and so on and so forth around the place with a stick and creating wars for itself, which it can get their own selfish strategic interest out, which ends up harming a lot of people. And they should be able to think and they should be able to turn this around. So, as I was saying, if you are involved in a conflict, it becomes very difficult for you to play a peacemaker's role, right? If today's US decides to say that, oh, nahi yaar, ruk jao, Ukraine, Russia, please stop, we'll talk and all that stuff, nobody's going to believe it, right? Nord Stream, this, that, there have been so many incidents, nobody will believe it. So, are the Chinese, as I said, trying to position themselves as peacemakers where the US are war makers? So, that's something that the US needs to now understand. How will the US react to MBS? Sorry about that speller there. MBS is interesting because the US will now have to literally reach out, and without Joe Biden, by the way, they'll have to find some guy who can go to MBS and level things out. Of course, next year's the election. So is MBS also trying to send a message to the political setup within the US that, listen, I'm not going to deal with these guys. All right, we need to get back to a saner setup which we were before, and we used to do business. US called it a pariah state. Now will the pariah state become the most favored partner? We'll have to watch, because if the Saudis are asking for civilian nuclear technology, they're asking for defense help and stuff like that. You'll have to upgrade the relationship somewhere. Can Joe Biden do that? No. That's another caveat in the entire game. Iran Saudi ties as a result of Chinese mediation. Is it a lose lose for US? Now, one thing that we must understand, yes, it is a lose lose to a certain extent, that the US would lose a certain amount of influence within the region. But generally speaking, as long as the region is stable, I think the US is okay. Because they're very clearly aware that the Chinese cannot send their military assets within the region to do anything. Yeah, you can keep doing trade with them. That's not a problem. I don't think the US is going to bother about that. Uh, Till a certain line, I think they'll look at it very positively. And let's see, the first statements have been positive. Let's see how things go forward. Yeah, if there are protests in one country or the other, and there are attempted coups and stuff like that, then we'll know which side the reaction goes to. But currently, in my opinion, at the moment, the US doesn't seem to be too fudged about it, because they know the weaknesses of China as well. And if they need to, they will rewire China on the other side, which they'll pretty easily do. They're doing this exercise with the South Koreans. The North Koreans are a bit rattled up, and I'm sure they'll try and do something with China to kind of pivot their focus back towards that side. If that happens, we know that this is the game. So we'll have to keep a watch out. This is the first initial reaction that I'm giving you. We'll have to keep a watch out for incidents that actually happen after this, for us to make sense of the multiple possibility structures that I've created in front of you. US is too over focused on Ukraine. And that's something I've said like 57 times, and I'm going to say it for the 58th time. Stop it. I mean, US needs to put a break on Ukraine. It's done. It's a cooked goose. You're going to burn it. Just be done with it. I mean, there's just no point in that war. The Russians are standing up. You thought they will fall down. They didn't. And now it's a grinding assault wherein the Ukrainians will fall. And if the US does not distance itself on time, they will get a backlash of Afghanistan back on them again. And that'll become a problem for the US. And something that the US lawmakers need to understand. Slow and steady, we see the narrative changing within the West. Slow and steady. Today, I just saw news. The Finnish had promised some jets to the Ukrainians and stuff like that. They had said, no, we can't do it. No, enough. Now, the Saudi kingdom, the family of, the Sauds, have been protected by the US. Even now, right from the inception till now, they've been protected and secured by the US. So, legitimacy of this family has been established by the US itself. Now, a lot of people may not agree with me on this, but that's how the game has been. The reaction, I won't say, has not fully come. And I look out for where does Victoria Noodle travel the next time, or what this thing is there. Now, why am I saying this? The next target on the menu for the US is Iran. Let me rephrase myself. Let me say that again. Post Ukraine, the target is Iran. We saw a little bit of a hint with regards to the hijab protest that happened there. Right? The target on the menu is Iran. So, how will this play? Because at the end of it, there have been statements coming out from the defense minister or the secretary of defense, who said, we will not allow Iran to make a nuclear bomb. And there are reports that the Iranians have actually enriched uranium up to 80%. They need it to be 94. So there's not much of a difference. So the next target is going to be Iran. How will the US now play this game with the Saudis? Or is the US playing this game to ensure that there is a certain amount of drop in the tensions with Iran, so that the menu could be easily accessed? Something we'll have to see how things go forward. And as I said, social issues. If there are protests in Saudi, you know where it is going. If there are protests in Iran, you know where that side is going. And if there are protests in any of the vassal countries to these two big powers within the Middle East, you know which side is going. So we'll have to keep a watch out for this particular thing. Let's talk about Iran itself. The failed JCPOA, right? International pressure is up on their nuclear program. Will Iran get a bomb even now? What will be the reaction of the Saudi Arabians? One of the things that we need to understand, there is a certain country who's providing a lot of help to the Saudis under the table with regards to nuclear weapons. And I think I don't need to mention which country it is. And in return, that country is now going to get some money. They've done it before, they'll do it again. So are the Saudis hedging their bets that, okay, if Iranians go nuclear, we also have our plans, right? And this brings me back to the game of the breakup of Pakistan video that we had done with General Rajiv Narayan. And if you actually see, all this kind of starts making sense, right? So if Iran gets a bomb, there you go, tuck, 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 things will fall into place. Something that we'll have to see going forward. Iran could also peel away a little bit of isolation that the US has put off on them. It's quite a bit. They can't talk to anybody, they can't trade with anybody. With Saudis, if the things open up, at least Iran Saudi trade will start off, diplomatic relations. And they've been trading. Aisi baat nahi hai. They do trade even now. The business keeps happening. Iran has also signed up a deal for the Su-35 fighter jets. Now, if the Iranians are trying to bring down the tension, why are they signing up fighter jets? Now, is this a there are larger geopolitical games to this. You might say, okay, they're trying to do this against Israel. The game that I like to see here is that the Iranians have supplied a lot of drones to the Russians and they're asking for something in return. Simple as that. So, there is, of course, the Iranians will also strengthen up their defenses. The Saudis are asking for the US. So, there's that thing is also going to go across. And I'm not even talking about the Israelis till now. Regional business will benefit. There is no question about it, and that's good. Have they given assurances? Has the Iranian given any assurances with regards to the bomb? The Saudis don't think so at the moment, and there have been not very official statements, but the bomb seems to have been kept away from the discussions as of now. The war in Yemen and Syria, of course, both are, the Iranian proxies fighting in this place. Will Iran be able to stop that, reduce that? How will it pitch it? Because remember, Yemen started up in 2014 and Syria started up in 2011. The diplomatic relations between Saudi and Iran broke down in 2016. So there is a even when both of them were fighting a proxy war, their diplomatic relations were still on. So what is the future of war in Yemen and Syria? Will they continue chugging along the way they are? Iran's commitment to a true rapprochement with a long-time adversary. How? Now, adversary is not this thing. They've got ethnic tensions, they've got religious tensions and stuff like that. They could do it. They were sort of diplomatic before. Will that happen again? Now, even if they do, as I said, the proxy wars may just continue. Saudis will still view Iran as an adversary and they will arm up and this and that. And that's one of the reasons we see the Iranians also buying jets. Now, if the Iranians are buying jets, let me show you the Saudi orders are not very far away. Military, cybersecurity. Now, cybersecurity, there's no red line for war. So it's very, very interesting. This gray zone warfare tactics could continue for all the time, right? You've got the Iranians who've actually done something very, very interesting in the region is that they've created multiple proxies in the area, right? You've got the Houthis, you've got the Lebanese, Lebanon. You've got proxies. You've got proxies within Iraq. You've got proxies fighting against Israel. You've got some proxies in Syria. Iran also, kind of supported one way or the other during the Nagorno-Karabakh war. And so Iran is spread out pretty well in terms of its fingering, if I may, sorry to use the word, within the region. How will it control them? Right? Now, one of the things that we'll have to see is that I call that the Pakistan syndrome, that you've created these snakes, now you don't know what to do with them. Kare kya? The deal could, however, have implications for a US led effort to isolate Iran economically, right? If it's completely isolated, no trade with anyone, then of course they're isolated. Now, here, if there is a certain amount of rapprochement, something may just move. Now, one thing we must understand is this is only the Saudi. UAE still has diplomatic relations with Iran, and they've been trading and this and that and the other. They've got decent, stable relations with the country. Uh, Iran, has a dream of regional dominance, cultural civilization, ye wo, and all that stuff. Of course, they broke away all their cultures and threw it in the kachre ka dabba. Different story. But what does this do to the Iranian dream of dominance? Now you got these two powers which are going to fight for regional dominance on the sly, but try and mend the relations. How will this entire khichdi go forward? Because when we know they're fighting without relations and stuff like that, there's a battle going on. Now how does this kachra go forward? Or is this a time where things will literally calm down and they'll start talking and actually mend ties within the region? Let's talk about Israel. Israel has been involved in the Abraham Accords. He's very successful. Some African countries and this and that have also signed in. Uh, Interestingly, Israelis and the Saudis have been working at the back end, right? It is believed that in his previous term, Netanyahu had visited Saudi as well and met the crown prince as well as the king of Saudi. A thaw between Riyadh and Tehran will complicate things a little bit for the Israelis, but they could figure it out. You've got the news that came out that it was greeted in Israel with surprise, anxiety, and introspection. They're all wondering, okay, now what do we do? I don't think that the Israelis would have been surprised because knowing their secret service and knowing their snooping abilities, I'm sure they knew what exactly was taking place. Israel will feel a little isolated because if all the Muslim countries get together, you've got a certain Jewish country that is going to stand on the side and say, okay, are these guys going to gang up now? So he will feel a little this thing. It will weigh its options, and I am telling you this: the Abraham Accords efforts will double up now because they will try and get rid of any sort of issues around the place so that they can go through and get normal relations with other Muslim countries as well. The internal political situation is Israel is bad right now. Okay, Netanyahu tried to change their Supreme Court laws and stuff like that, and there's been protests, and the current government is under criticism. As it is, he's termed as a very hardline person. So that's what is happening, and there were huge protests on the streets and stuff like that. Yeah, some people called it possibility of civil war, and this I don't think so at the moment. Not much would change actually if Israelis don't overreact. If they just keep their cool, get their act into place, and see how things will go forward, I think it'll be all right. Turkey, another player in the game, where who wanted to be the Ummah, the leader of the Islamic world. I think Naveen, you've asked a question, so I'll just put it up. Thanks for your contribution, although, and you've asked the same question briefly about Turkey with regards to this. Turkey nurses a dream for supremacy of the Islamic world and is an alternate to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. You're absolutely correct. Uh, but Turkey itself is actually trying to reposition itself right now. So let's see. Now, Turkey would have looked at this and said, okay, the entire Islamic world is again shifting, and that's something that the Turkish leaders would take into consideration. In May, they've got an election, I think a month in advance. They were supposed to have it in June. Erdogan has planned it up. Massive earthquake. They're still facing the backlash of it. Now coming down because of the Ukraine war, the Turkish have slightly kind of teetered on towards the Russian side because they're looking at the Russian gas and they want to have and become the gas hub for Russia to supply gas into Europe. Since the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline, they want to actually use and expand the Turk Stream pipeline coming in from Russia. So they're trying to, I think, have good relations with the Russians at this point of time. Now the Russians again have good relations with the Middle East. So will they be able to help? Uh, is this an answer to the US great game? Big question, because if the Turkish are actually going to be resetting their entire network, is this part of that game for Turkey as well? because Turkey doesn't want to be left out. Remember that within the US great game, the Turkish are going to be left out right in the corner with some land gain here and there and stuff like that. But they're nowhere in the main frame of events. Is are the Turkish going to try and get into this and try and see what they can leverage out of themselves? Why am I saying this? Because Turkey is involved in Syria. Iran is involved in Syria. They're trying a peace deal there, which comes under criticism as well as is being said to work out. There've been some talks in Russia. I think all three or four of them got together last month and they kind of talked out and how to kind of solve the relations. Now, Turkey and Syria they were actually best of friends, right? I don't know what happened to Erdogan. He came under the US pressure and he started pushing for the removal of Bashar al-Assad. Now what has happened is that the Turkey and Syria, both of them, both the so-called uh, unappointed kings, Assad as well as Erdogan, have decided to actually start talking. And Erdogan has assured Turkey that we will not work on your removal and stuff like that. We want to secure our interests with the Kurds in that region. So the Turkish have actually sent a little bit of a force going into northern Syria, and these talks started up, and the Turks have kind of just kept a little bit of a slow this thing. Now, uh, the issue is that you've got Sweden supports a particular Kurdish movement that actually does a lot of damage to the Turkish people and the Turkish interests in that region. So the Turks are kind of trying to push them away. The organization is known as the PKK, right? So there's a lot of politics within that entire game as well. And Tehran says, yeah, Turkish Syrian relations will come at the expense of its own influence within Syria and that entire region. So they probably won't want Turkey and Syria to kind of join up. Now, during the Nagorno Karabakh war, Turkey and Israel supported Azerbaijan, Iran supported Armenia, and gave a lot of grief to the Turkish and said, you're bloody lining up with these Israelis. They also gave a lot of grief to the Azerbaijanis. Yeah, you're bloody Muslims and you're lining up with Israel. What's wrong with you and this and that? So there's a lot of historical context to this entire thing that we need to understand before we get into analyzing what has happened. Now, last two slides, and then I'll talk about a little bit about what how India gets affected with this entire thing, and we'll get into the questions. Sorry, guys, because I needed to give a context to you guys, so it's probably a little long, but without that context, this entire conversation will not kind of falter. Will not kind of fall into place, not falter. Falter is the wrong way around. Anyways, this is an NSA level talk, right? National Security Advisors. They've just sat down and discussed and said, "Ha, theek hai, we will open up the embassies and this and that. We will have the ministerial contacts." The embassy timeline has been given 2 months, but the foreign minister meeting has no timeline at the moment. So, how deep is this particular thing, and how much is the world overselling it because of the Chinese game? Is something that we'll have to see going forward. Is China dictating terms? This is a point that General Rajiv Narayanan brought up, which actually, we were just having an offline chat, and he actually brought this out, and I said, okay, that's interesting, because if the Chinese are dictating now, Chinese again, like their very best friends in Pakistan, have a tendency of being a very short-lived influence in political games. So, what's going to happen with regards to the Chinese influence, and are the Chinese able to actually dictate terms to both these things? I don't think so, but something that we'll have to consider. Both China and the Saudis are taking a big gamble here. Significant chips on Iranian good intentions, knowing very well. Now, when we talk about proxies, I only spoke about Iranian proxies. The Iranians actually say that ISIS and this and that are Saudi proxies. Uh, they some parts of the ISIS are proxies of the US. There's no question about it. They've trained them, they've armed them. As a matter of fact, the Al Nusra Front and all that stuff gets a lot of arms from the US even now, right? So that's some, and it's not directly from the US. They buy it from some third rogue place and give it, and this and that and all that. So there's a lot of kachra there. There are news about US removing oil from Syria without, purpose, without permission, and that oil gets sold to some corrupt regime somewhere, who gives it weapons, and that weapons get used in Syria. So leaving a plausible deniability for the US. They did that with cocaine a long time ago, and now they're doing it with oil. And that's a whole different story that we will get into once I discuss the war in Syria with someone who's an expert in the subject in the next week or something like that. Okay, so the rivalry between the two Gulf nations are so deeply rooted. There is ethnicity, there is religion, there is, whole lot of things. And do you guys, and I'm going to open this out to you guys, do you think diplomatic relations will be able to overcome it? Look at the relations between India and Pakistan. It's the same. We all know the Shia Sunni issues, and each one of them calls each other kafir and wants to the other. Do you think simple diplomatic engagement will be able to sort this out? Again, question is, look at India and Pakistan. The future of President Bashar al-Assad, whom the Saudis wanted to topple and Iran wanted to remain in power, is going to be another big, huge dividing line. The Yemen, as per se, is a ruined country, so a lot of questions may not be asked in that area. But Syria, who has a lot of oil and this and that, where the president is intact, some part of the government is still intact, uh, and of course, there are in northern Syria, there are northeastern Syria, there are U.S. troops. What is the future of these U.S. troops? Interestingly, General Milley, who's the head, I think he's like our CDS, I forget the designation. He went to meet these troops some time ago. So did the US actually know this is happening, and they wanted to reassure their troops in that place? Yeah, listen, don't worry, we've got a plan. We've got a counter plan to what is happening, and we'll figure it out. What that counter plan is will only come out with time as time goes by. Let me just say this very clearly. Diplomatic relations does not mean friends. India and Pakistan have diplomatic relations. We've got embassies working. Does that mean that we are friends? No, not by a large aspect of it. Right? So, trust is a big question mark that is going to come across. Even if, ties get normal, Saudi Arabia, as I said before, they will consider Iran as a adversary. And if Iran arms up with anything, Russian jets, nuclear weapons, the same, it'll build up into an arms race within the region. What will Iran do with all these terror groups slash militias from whichever side that you look at it? Will Iran stop its nuclear ambitions? And if it does get the bomb, will the Saudis get a bomb? And then the closet Israeli bomb that is actually kept under the table, will it actually come out into the game? So that's something again which is a consequence. The big thing that I want to say is that the Western powers need to stop these personal attack on leaders. This is getting a little ridiculous. Putin is this, Putin is that, Putin is this, Putin is that. Yeah, 2 years down the line or year down the line, you'll have to sit with the guy and talk to him. How will you do that? And this whole hostility that is there against leaders, MBS for that matter. Oh, pariah state, this, that, ye, wo, and all that stuff. Why? Now, when you have to go talk to him, you're basically going on your knees. It's stupid. So the Western powers need to think about this. Is Saudi trying to get away with its with US weapons? As I said before, MBS, nuclear deal, respectful engagement, and create a leverage, right? Riyadh is asking the Biden administration for security guarantees, as I said, as an exchange. At this stage, it's too early to detect anything. As I said, there'll be a lot of things that will actually happen, lot of little incidents and news items that will come forward, and that's something that we'll have to keep a track of. As I said, what I'm giving you are the initial these things, a baseline thought for you guys to actually look at, and when you see news, you'll be able to make some sense of it with regards to what I told you today. So I hope I'm actually be able to give you the gist of it. But these deliberations, if anybody says that the Israelis are lost, US is lost, EAO and all that stuff, firstly, they started in Iraq. Iraq is a hardcore US sided country. And this is not an overnight game कि भाई वहां पर गए ये चाइना में गए and they signed a deal and वापस आ गए शी जिनपिंग की जय हो. No, it's not like that. These deliberations have been going on for a while, right? And these deliberations have been going on along with the Abraham Accords. So there's of course an understanding which might have got done between the two countries, that KSA and Iran, that was, listen, your and my relation, let's fix up. Don't, you can't question me on my relation with someone else, and neither am I. So a practical sort of an approach, is that what has happened? Having said that, there might be a certain reduction in unrequired violence. Of course, the wars, to my mind, will continue, but unrequired civilian violence might just reduce to a large extent, if I may. And if things do work out, the UAE has shown that it can balance ties with Israel, as I was mentioning to you, that they have very good relations with Israel, and they are building up good relations with the. Sorry, they have very good relations with the Iranians, and they're building up good relations with Israel as well. So there is an option here. There is a gap where this particular game could actually work, which brings me to my last slide. Excuse me. India, we've got good relations with both. Good for us if they want to be friends. We won't have to, be scared that what if they fight, where will our oil come from? Currently, you're getting a large supply from Russia, but that's still not the whole supply that you need for your country. So what's going to happen? And if India, I would say India must say, yeah, yeah, become friends, good. But India must figure out a way to create a separation between these guys and China. The relations between these guys and China and the relations between these guys and us must be separate. That has to be assured. And with the setup and the diplomacy within India right now, I think that will be easily achievable. Normalization, of course, will be damn good for trade. There's just no question about it. We are looking at this north-south corridor, this, that, and everything. It's going to be very good for us, right? So there, I don't see any sudden downside coming in as far as India is concerned. Remember this: when Israel and UAE normalized, we gained. We got I to you two. Now we've got this and that and the other, and you're also got the Haifa port over that side as very strategic location. So you can imagine India needs to find a way to get the best out of this situation. And this is not too detrimental to us as far as the Chinese, getting into that place is concerned. It's not that the Chinese are going to get a military base there, or it's not that the Chinese are going to be able to cut off our oil supply just to get their own and stuff like that. No, that's not going to happen. So, as far as the game is concerned, fair enough. They've got their relations with China, they're normalizing it. As long as they don't fall into bed with China, I think we're okay. Which I don't think MBS is stupid enough of actually trying to do. So there's India looks positive at the moment, right? Unless something really stupid happens. But of course, the Pakistanis will be looking at it very carefully because they've got again Shia Sunni issues within their country. So whichever side is heavy is going to create a challenge, right? And Pakistanis and Iranians don't really, yeah, they've got relations, they don't have relations. You can kind of term it the way you want to, because the Iranians recently threatened the Pakistanis for a $18 billion fine if they don't kind of you know finish their pipeline and stuff like that. The Russians have been trying to say कि यार pipeline बना लो ये वो and all that, because at the end of it the Russians know if they get a pipeline into India, that's a lot of fuel that the Indians will need. So they're gonna try and push that. Of course, the Pakistanis are stupid. They won't, look at the brighter things in life. They are very happy the way they are. So I think India is in plus. It doesn't really affect us that much. Having said that, I'm sure there's a lot of back end diplomacy which is taking place from our favorite Minister Jai Shankar, and there's a lot which is actually happening. That's all I had for you guys. A long, long, long introduction into the subject, and now I'm going to just go through your questions and see what you guys have to say. Before that, like, subscribe, and if you can, do help out the Dev Talks efforts with the QR code up here. or you can become members with the join button down there, or click thanks for a super sticker or a super chat. Thank you so much for your contributions. Right, let's see. Naveen Sahab, your question is here. Thank you so much. Fundamental question. We can talk about being potentially huge, but there any of these players credible? Can they hold true to an understanding, especially Iran and China, famously problematic? China is trying to swindle into a diplomatic gap that the US has left, right? It's not a military gap, it's not a physical gap, it's a diplomatic gap. Uh, One thing about the US, no matter what you say, Naveen, is the factor that they're able to self correct pretty fast. They have this innate ability within their society to self correct. And that's why a lot of people say that US is who it is because of that. Look at their issues with Afghanistan. They had these congressional committees which were broadcasted to the world, where they lambasted their very top leaders and their generals and stuff like that. And that was wide in the open, and they correct themselves. It doesn't happen in any other country that way. They don't have publicized hearings for senior members of their this thing. Uh, you see what's happening with regards to Twitter files. I mean, they're coming out and threadbaring it in front of the world with regards to what the current administration had ordered for them. So this US has this very weird ability, and they're able to do this. But as far as you understand the credibility of these players, the Saudis would look at it, यार ठीक है यार, अगर बैठ के इसके साथ बात करनी है थोड़ा टाइम, we get some peace, fair enough, let's take the risk. You'll have to kind of play it as it comes. Iran, I have my doubts, because Iran, if it kind of tries to restrain these so-called militia groups and stuff like that, they're going to start getting a backlash, right? Because those guys are hardened in that particular ideology. So bringing them back, it's not like a switch. They're not armed forces that the Iranians will be able to get back. So the over religiosity within the region that the Saudis especially are trying to break today is going to cause the credibility issue within this thing. At the moment, I think the Iranians would also say, "यार थोड़ा time चलाते हैं, let's get a little legitimacy up, let's get a little business going. We need it right now." So it's probably in their national interest to kind of keep shut and just let it happen. How far they'll be able to let it happen is something that we need to, analyze. Turkey, your question, I have taken it up. All right. Thank you so much. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in addition to the prior comment, has also felt left out with the focus on UAE in its most multilateral forums, I2U2. Well, I2U2 will only be possible if the Saudis actually sit with the Israelis. That has not happened as of now, at least openly. So there's a bit of a gap in that aspect. And as I said, the Saudis have been trying to figure out from the Americans how they can actually get that gap sorted out. And they want these defense protections, and they want some nuclear deals and stuff like that. Why do they want nuclear deals? Because if you have a reactor, you should be able to do stuff on your own. So that's probably their thought. Uh, will it happen or not is something that we'll have to see. Thanks again. You say geopolitical events in India, G20 plus SEO, Italian PM for Raisina, Australian PM, German Chancellor, Japanese PM. So we've been the center of diplomacy. Is this an attempt to divert away focus? I really don't think so. It is probably an effort to bring up the Chinese image and to portray Xi Jinping as a peacemaker within his third term. The Chinese are trying to soften their stance. uh, it's not it's an outwardly projection rather than a reality. So they would try and get these kind of things out. They also want to win the narrative war, right? At the end of it, with the war in Ukraine, you've got a whole lot of narratives flying around the place. And the Chinese are now being told that you're going to be under sanctions if you supply weapons to the US. So they're probably trying to tell the world, no, 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 see, we don't get involved in wars. We're trying to broker a peace deal. So the global security initiative of the Chinese is something that they want to project forward. So I kind of think it like that, which probably is a little contrary to what you're saying. But I agree with you with regards to the center of diplomacy, and there's a big reason for that with regards to economy, with regards to whole lot of other structures within the world today. So that's as for that. Let's see who else. Oh, there are loads of comments that have come. John, sir, you say that Russia will sell Su-35 jets to Iran. No idea how many. I think about 30 or 35, if I'm not mistaken. Uh, but that might have acted as a sweetener. The idea is to isolate Israel and the US, but the big elephant in the room is Iran's nuclear ambitions. It is, sir, but I think the Saudis are not stupid. They would have thought about this. If the Iranians do go forward, what all do we need to do? One, two, three, four. And I don't think that the US will stand out of this entire game, because at the end of it, they still have a very strong presence in that region. So yeah, TK, fair enough. The Chinese want to play peacemaker for a little bit. They'll probably let it go. And honestly speaking, Joe Biden has been a disaster as far as the Middle East is concerned. I don't agree with any of his policies that he's set up. I don't agree with the way that he's actually gone ahead with this entire game. And you have to understand that the Democrats have not, because of their hawkish nature, they've not been able to get their entire game going. You also ask Saudis deal with this new Su-35 deal again. They're asking for defense security umbrella from the US. They're saying we need security assurances from the US. So yeah, you can keep buying this thing. I have the US security assurances, and it'll probably be able to squeeze out an F-35 or for themselves or something like that. So they'll be able to sort it out. Raghunandan has an interesting comment. He says, I don't see any change in the small to medium term, and there is no benefit to Saudi to change the situation. Saudis do have a benefit, probably a drone attack less here and there or the other, but in the short and medium term, things need to, unless and until some protest or something breaks out somewhere, it's going to be difficult to analyze the complete impact of it, let's say 10 years down the line. Right? Will USA push Baloch liberation now, especially if Pakistan? Well, I'd like to answer this, but I'm going to do a show on this. So if you can please join us with that. This and we've also done a show with General Rajiv Narayanan with regards to the US grand strategy with Pakistan. Have a check at that. Right? Rahul, I'm going to skip your question because let's keep it to the subject. Uh, Mark says impressive presentation. Thank you so much, Mark. It's uh, thank you for putting that out. Uh, John, sir, you say, wow, no expectation of settling with the Houthis is a surprise. I guess that was just not part of this deal. Too bad for Yemen. Then, well, that's what the initial news is. I presume the Iranians will tell them to calm down for a little bit, and then this thing probably give a little sense of confidence and this and that for their own trade benefit, trade and this and that. But let's see if that thing actually works, because remember, these guys have a brain of their own. So it's interesting. Naveen, you say finally, I feel like China might have given a Pakistan's Taliban moment when this diplomatic coup blows up in this phase. I think they're Naveen. Honestly, I think the opposite. They're in a no win, no loss sort of a situation. It's a diplomatic this thing. They're not putting any troops. They're nothing. If this thing blows up in their face or this thing goes south, they'll say, "Yeah, we tried. Yeah, it's okay. It didn't work. We are the peacemakers." That is the narrative that the Chinese are trying to actually push across. Can China be the next security provider in the region like USA? As we know, West Asia is a tinderbox of ethnic and religious issues. Trust you me, the Chinese troops will not step into that region to help anybody else. They won't come and help themselves. Forget anything else. Please look at. I don't see the possibility of the Chinese actually coming into this game and trying to say, okay, now we will protect you and this and that. That's just a little far fetched in terms of an expectation. I've covered, Abhijit, you mentioned about the CPEC, straight route to Hormuz. Well, that could be the case, but it'll require a lot of investment from the Chinese. I don't think they have the money at the moment. Right, let's keep it on the subject. Aspirant, right? Thank you for joining us, but I'd like to answer questions on the subject itself. Partha says, can China, India, and Russia, Saudi Arabia, OPEC work together to make US spend drain to avoid another Ukraine, at least till BRICS expands? Why are you so pro BRICS, brother? It has China. See, you gotta remember one thing, and I've said this multiple times, and I believe in this. One must have a pro India policy rather than an anti someone policy. You know, an anti someone policy makes you become Pakistan. You cannot be anti someone. Your entire existence need to be pro yourself rather than anti someone. If your actions do reduce something here and there, fair enough, that's good. But at the end of it, to actually grow in today's world, you will need the US to be standing by you and take as much as advantage of that particular position. And that's one of the reasons why the current government is putting in a lot of effort with regards to US India relations. So there's a game there as well. That's something that we need to understand. Manvendra Singh, sorry, we'll have to go forward. I think we've answered this question with regards to internet network today in the afternoon. Please check that out. Uh, it'll be easier. Okay. Wait. Let's see. Yeah. Amay says the Chinese are digging a hole for themselves. Remember, India also tried to bring up peace by being a mediator. Our diplomats learned it the hard way. It's of no use. We should let China have fun. I don't know which mediator, which war that you're talking about, where we tried to get into a mediation. I am not sure of the reference. Remember one thing: for any country to become a mediator, it has to benefit on both the sides, right? So that's something that we need to understand. The war in Ukraine, if you're trying to refer to, it's a zero sum game. Why I say that is because either ways you're gonna lose, right? Because you got Russia, who's a very strong partner of yours, and if the terms are not favoring to him, he'll kind of blame you. And then you've got Ukraine, which is a strong partner of the West, and if they feel that they'll blame you. So it's difficult to kind of get into that sort of a situation where you can get hit from both the sides for no rhyme or reason. Uh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, its existence comes under threat if USA doesn't provide security, and that's why there is no regime change in KSA till now. If the US does feel they've gone a little out of bounds, well, it's something that we'll have to wait and watch. Whatever, Iran should not get nuclear weapons. China spoiler only. China is looking for Iran as a proxy to fight with the US. Well, if nuclear weapons is something, I honestly think that nobody should have it because it's too destructive. You can't use it, and it's crazy. But they have kept a certain strategic balance alive within the world, and we are still alive in spite of going through 40 years of a Cold War. Uh, your opinion with regards to should Iran get a nuclear weapon or not? I personally don't have an opinion on that. The reason is that, well, no matter how hardline Iranians are, there is still an existential threat to their existence. If you look at it from their perspective, they want to secure themselves. So that's something which is okay, fair enough. Venki sir, good evening. Provocative presentation. Thank you, sir. Great questions. I have three questions, though. Absolutely, I will take up all three. Which says, I would can the US one would or can the US sanction the KSA now since it has closed its gap with the IRI, and would a dilapidated West afford a fall in line? I don't think sanctions are coming their way because the see the biggest issue is with regards to Saudi Arabia. It still holds a lot of sway within the Muslim world, and the US, if it wants to dominate and control a certain segment of the Muslim world, needs to have the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on their side. The leaders don't get along, but let me tell you, there's a lot of back end work that actually happens between both the countries, which does not come out into the open. I am quite positive, and if you see the relations between Trump and these guys, it was pretty good. So I'm quite positive if a Republican does come to power in the next election, you will find quite a lot of change with regards to the entire game which is actually happening there. So there's a lot of ambiguity with regards to you know this game here. The weakened or dilapidated West, as you talk about, is West, yes, but I don't think the US is going to be that weak because they don't care. They're making money that their economy is going to bounce back because of the amount of weapons they're going to sell to a lot of countries in Europe, East Asia, and so on and so forth. They will not be in that sort of a weak position as we think they would be. Diplomatically, yes, if Joe Biden gets another term, they're going to be dumped. Let me say that very clearly. But militarily, economically, no. Uh, the interesting thing would be that the US would be looking at it from a far away perspective, and they might just try and get the Chinese to, you know, to have a cost on the Chinese rather than anything else. So that's something that I would look at going forward. We'll have to see how the US actually reacts. Till now, it's been very positive. They said, it's not about China. We accept the peace anywhere, and we appreciate it and stuff like that. Is IRI opting for this to prevent itself reverse to Persia? Zoroastrianism is rising. It is actually, a lot of people say that. The factor of what you're trying to bring about, Venki Saab, is very interesting. Uh, the Iranians today are in a place where they are trying to resist a certain hardline structure which has been imposed upon them. Right? So that's something that we must understand at the baseline. Having said that, a large segment of the population also does favor the hardline approach that they have because of the indoctrination that has been done for their country with regards to the anti-West. So it's not that the entire country is saying no, 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 inko bhagao and this and that, and it's not that. Even when the hijab protests were on, there was an opposition protest to the hijab protest which was also on, which was not being shown by the West. Of course, when killing started and this and that, the entire thing went flat. But today it's calmed down. There are these displays of anger which is happening in Iran, but I don't think the Iranian central regime is that weak that they will fall off a little bit here. As far as religiosity is concerned, it's a dangerous exercise with regards to Zoroastrianism within Iran. If people are doing it on the sly, fair enough, but it's going to be dangerous for them. Gotta say, this is a brilliant PR exercise post Xi's uh, re-election. Now, if only Iran and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia can see the upside and behave, even if they want to, Naveen, I don't know if they can. I'm sure the Saudis also have their proxies fighting Iran somewhere here and there in the other. I don't know if they can because you've gone. See, when you have that much of blood spilt, right, on the battlefields, it creates a certain amount of craziness within the way countries deal with themselves. So that's just what I think. Is the entire exercise just a Russian game to divert focus from the subject that is more precious for the US compared to fighting a lose lose war? Sir, if you're asking me, it's a pure Russian project. I don't think so. It is Chinese and Russian together. That I think so. And if you're also asking me, is this particular thing time to put the Americans back after the Nord Stream and this and that? So a whole collative pushback on the Americans could be possible. And with the reanointment of Xi Jinping, the timing is as it is very interesting. The Chinese and the Russians are one thing. Let me just say that about these two countries, that their timing of communications have a lot of sense if you actually look at them. There's a reason why they do certain things at certain times, and they actually plan that properly. It's not like the West who goes one says something here and says something there. Very rarely will you see things going off track when these two kind of countries are dealing. They'll probably get a smack on their face, that's fine, but their communication is not off track, and that's something that we need to understand very, very clearly. uh right. India wants Iranian oil at $55. Yeah, sir, I would say $1. Why not? India should find its own oil reserves. Even I think there's some that they're looking for. So let's hope they find them. Uh, we are at 1 minute 19, guys. I'll just take another 5 minutes and close the show. What may be the consequences of Iran testing nuclear weapons as a country is already isolated? Doesn't affect them much. If they do test a nuclear weapon, let me assure you, the Israelis will get after them. You'll find these old the longest raid that took place, which is bombing the Iraqi reactor and stuff like that. That would take place. The USA will not accept it. The US has said we will not allow Iranians to actually get a nuclear weapon. So when they are saying it's something that hard, well, you don't know what all they're actually wanting to. Uh, uh, it's it's quite delicate actually. So you can actually, it can go both ways. So it's very dangerous. Uh, the But one thing I want to say, actually, if you don't mind, I want to actually, you've brought about an interesting thought, and the factor with regards to the entire game of oil is going to be predominant for some time because of the Russian sanctions. And if Iran is able to get some oil into the market, that's going to be an interesting move. And if some countries do start buying it, that's going to be a very interesting move going forward. Because if they're able to resist off, if certain countries are able to resist off the US sanctions and buy Iranian oil, that's quite interesting because the Chinese are. There's no question about it. So they are. We were. I think we still are to a very small extent. But if somebody can actually latch on to the Iranians, it'll be interesting because the Iranian financial economic setup will also start improving, and a whole lot of things will change. Then the entire geopolitical structure of the game will start changing. Uh, right. Okay. A lot. What will be the impact of the looming financial crisis in the US? Probably take a mild stance for a new diplomatic alliance. Sir, I think they will start printing notes, nothing else. The US has been doing that. They'll be able to pull it off. They've got enough set up. I mean, don't go by this $31.4 trillion debt and this and that. They've got enough heft, enough assets to kind of liquidate themselves. They're not in that terrible a condition. Okay, fair enough. I think that is just about it. Most of the questions are, again, I've kind of answered most of them, so I won't want to kind of repeat all those questions. But thanks a lot, guys. This has been insane. I mean, I never thought I'll be talking about the Middle East. I loved I love reading about the Middle East, and it's very interesting history. It all started with the Israeli Arab wars, and so my interest in that area grew with the expansion of Israeli borders. How did the countries react, and various different things? The Syrian war, which is a confused state of affairs. I don't think many people in India would actually know who's fighting who. Uh, it's interesting. Somebody says Israel is not happy. I'm sure on the onset of it, Israel will not be happy. There are a lot of terrible comments coming against the government right now. But the Israelis, if I know something, that there would have been some action plan that would have come into place with regards how to handle the situation. They're pretty well planned people, so I think they'll be able to do something. And again, initial reaction, guys, this is like 24 hours after the, not even 24 hours, 12, 14 hours after the news is broken out. I've done a nice long presentation for you guys, giving you a background of the game. Now, whatever happens, please do look at the factor that we discussed it here, and then how does that stuff connect forward in terms of how things are happening in the future. So my point of giving this presentation was to create a baseline, right, on which we could build up with further news. And as I said, in this week I'm going to get somebody who's going to take a deep dive into this game and see what more can we learn from this. Thank you so much, guys. Good morning, sir. Somebody is saying, okay, you're from, I think, another part of the world. So good morning. I'm about to say good night because it's 11:45, I guess. Thank you so much, guys. It's heartening that you guys, uh, 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 involve yourself in these conversations. I hope you like what I put across in terms of the content. Uh, Passing comment says, Venki Saab, such all round peace in the world would be extremely disconcerting from the US deep state. Absolutely. We need to watch and watch. As I said, there is, if some little battle breaks out somewhere, who's doing it and what's happening. Yeah, but I think the empty stocks in Europe will be enough of an incentive for the US military industrial complex to actually sell a lot of weapons. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me this evening. Tomorrow will be an interesting day. We'll be talking about uh, the whole factor that the UK is trying to blame the Indian Army on the issue that happened in 1947 during the war. There's an article on the Guardian that I'm going to threadbare with Colonel Ajay Raina at about 3:30 in the afternoon. I'll put out the links, guys. That one is going to be insane. And after that, we will, in the next week, as I said, some very interesting interviews coming across where we will threadbare a little more about various different geopolitical events. I hope you like this video and the one that I did in the afternoon with General Narayan. Tomorrow, Sunday, I'll probably be doing one major video and a small sort of a clipper in the evening or something like that. So enjoy your Sunday, have a great day, and thank you so much. Jai Hind.